All right, so this is the review video for Origin of Life, and we'll just jump right into the questions. Most often, we hear about the first living cell coming about in a warm primordial soup. What is wrong with this? Well, a lot of things are wrong with it. I mean, life does not come from non-life. It's the law of biogenesis. Nothing has ever been seen to go against that law, just like nothing's ever been seen to go against the second law of thermodynamics. That's why they're laws. But the way you should approach this one is through two things, really: hydrolysis and chirality. Hydrolysis is, in this warm primordial soup, it would inevitably have water. All living things need water. But in order for life to spring out of this soup, you need molecules to link up and create more and more complex molecules, which would hopefully one day get you an amino acid, which would hopefully one day give rise to life. That's not going to happen because a property of water is it takes these molecules that might be linking up and getting longer, and it just messes them up, and it doesn't let them get very long. It's just something water does. The other thing is chirality, for these molecules to link together to eventually create these amino acids, which of course are the building blocks of life. They have to all be the left-handed versions of those molecules. All molecules come in left and right-handed versions. And in all living things, these molecules have to be left-handed. But if you're in a randomly created primordial soup, you'd have a mix of left and right-handed molecules, realistically. And as soon as a right-handed molecule jams itself in there, you're back to square one. So those are the two main issues. You're not going to get life from non-life. You're not going to get the building blocks of life from non-life. You're not going to get the building blocks of the building blocks from random molecules moving around. Number two, back in Darwin's day, the cell was thought of as a simple lump of albuminous combination of carbon. How has this view changed? And what does that mean for the origin of life? So this view has changed a lot since Darwin's day. Back then, they didn't have the technology to know how complicated life was. But as time has gone on and we've got more and more powerful microscopes and better technology, we can peer into the cell, not just see what's going on in there, but we can see how things are moving around with respect to each other and what functions they're performing. And from what we see now, what we call a simple cell is way more complicated than the most advanced, expensive smartphone. So, we can cut Darwin some slack. Back then, they didn't know how complicated things were. But they're super complicated. And because things are super complicated like that, it points to a designer. It does not point to life somehow springing forth on its own. The more sophisticated the simple cell looks, the less likely it is that it just came about on its own. Number three, talk to me about DNA and information theory and how that impacts the idea of life coming from non-life. Well, in the notes we looked at the example of a book. When you open up a book, you recognize the letters, words, and phrases, and they give that book meaning and purpose. But if you take an ink pen and you flick that ink at the page, it's not going to join up in such a way to randomly create letters and words and phrases. That's something you have to impart to it. You have to have a language that gives that book and those words meaning. Well, in the same way, in a living cell, even the simplest living cell, when we look at all the parts that make it up, there is nothing about what make those parts up. There's nothing in the chemistry of a cell that would cause those molecules and those bits and pieces of it to link up in the ways that it needs to for it to live and thrive and function. It's not just a matter of having the right things in the right locations. What the real miracle of life is how all those things operate. You and me in the simplest cell are way more than the sum of all our parts. We are way more than just the addition of all the molecules that make us up. Even if you could somehow get those things in the right locations at just the right time and the right place and with respect to each other, you're not going to be any closer to getting life because they're not programmed to function. You need that programming. I used the example of my phone. If you rip off the back of your phone and you look at all the hardware in there, it's pretty sophisticated. But if it's not programmed, or if someone wipes all the software off of it, it's not going to do anything. It's as good as dead. And the simplest living cell is the exact same. You know, if you could have all the things right there, but if you wipe it clean of all the molecular software, all the programs, all the functions that those tiny things know how to do somehow, then it's as good as dead. You're back to square one. So it's not the hardware. Again, all the hardware of my phone would still be here. It would still look crazy complicated and sophisticated, just like a living cell if you had all the right things in the right locations. But if either of those two things are not programmed to do what they need to do to live and thrive and survive, it doesn't matter. You're back to square one. It's not a living cell. It's not going to replicate itself. Biologists who believe life came from non-life are divided into two camps. One believes the first living cell came from an RNA world. The other believes it came from proteins. Talk to me about these ideas and whether they're good or bad. Well, they're both bad. This is the protein first model we talked about was the Miller-Urey experiment, where they tried to replicate what they believed was the early Earth atmosphere. And as a result of that, they got a toxic tar. Within that toxic tar, they did find a couple of the simplest amino acids. But these simple amino acids, even if they didn't exist in poison, would be far from what you would need for life to arise. So yeah, the protein first idea doesn't work. That experiment showed that random chemical processes and interactions produce random chemicals. No surprise there. The RNA first idea is just as bad. RNA is unstable. So even if you magically had this RNA floating around in the RNA world, in the primordial soup, it's usually called the RNA world. And they aren't going to stick around long enough for anything feasible to happen. You know, if you're going to give billions of years for life to occur, that RNA isn't going to last for that long. It breaks down very quickly over time. And its constituent parts that make it up break up very quickly over time. So there's no way that that's going to occur. And you also run into the same issue with chirality and hydrolysis. Water breaks up the parts of RNA that would serve to form it, so it's not going to get there in the first place anyway. And just kind of in short, to sum this one up, I probably should have started with this. Protein is really good at catalyzing. It can make a cell function, but it can't replicate itself. If a cell can't replicate, it's no good. RNA is great at replicating, but it can't function. It can't catalyze. It can't cause that cell to do what it needs to do to live and thrive and survive. So you need both of those things. RNA and protein, you need both of those functions. And those two things are never going to get you separately life. They'd have to come together on their own at the exact same time. You're not going to get one magical particle doing both. And finally, Nobel Prize winner Francis Crick believes that life coming from non-life is a problem. He believes in directed panspermia instead, which is aliens seeding life on Earth. Is this a reasonable way to fix that issue, and why? It is not reasonable, because even if aliens seeded life on Earth, then who created the aliens? Well, other aliens. Well, then who created those aliens? Other aliens. Well, who created those aliens who created the aliens? You know, you're just pushing the problem back here. Life still had to originate from non-life somewhere, and this does not answer that question. And you can't keep pushing this problem back in time, because this Big Bang supposedly happened in the finite past. It fixes nothing. It answers nothing about the origin of life question. So it is not a reasonable solution to that issue.